Excellent. Good afternoon from Akuawai, or wherever you're listening to us from. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a research and education specialist at Akuawai, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of 4 virtual roundtables we'll be hosting this week on COVID-19 and how it is affecting our campuses and how our housing residence life professionals are responding to it. Today's roundtable is really a space for professionals of all levels to come together and really talk about what they're experiencing, lessons learned, sharing resources, sharing ideas. And truly, this is meant to be a conversation. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but this is not going to be your traditional webinar. This is supposed to be much more conversational. I am joined by 3 outstanding co-facilitators today that are here to share insights and experiences and wisdom that they can provide that you may be able to take back to your home campuses. I'll allow them each to introduce themselves, and our cue to start our session today is really if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're seeing on your campus, and we'll go through each one of our co-facilitators, and I'd like Pam to start.
Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. As the slide indicates, I serve as Assistant VP for Student Life and Executive Director of Housing and Food Services at the University of Washington at the Seattle campus. I also currently serve as the Association Vice President, so pleased to be a participant and work with you on this today. It's hard to be brief about what's happening on my campus, but I will attempt. I would say that we are absolutely in the thick of it here. We went to online courses only for the tail end of our winter quarter. We are about to enter into what would be our spring break in the coming week. And we will be in online classes for at least the first month of spring quarter, which is scheduled to begin on March 30th. We have, in regard to our program, we house about 10,000 individuals on campus, and you can imagine it's been incredibly disruptive for our students. We have retained so far somewhere between 30 and 40% of our population, but we are now beginning, today we're launching communicating with our residents as to our plan for spring quarter, and of course we are making incredible we have incredible flexibility as far as our students and whether or not they will stay with us or leave. At this point in time, we do have all of our residence halls open, as well as our dining facilities, with some exception, with certainly some exception because the campus community is not really present on the campus. So we're trying to serve predominantly our residential community. Seattle is, got out of the block on this pretty quickly as compared to some other cities in the country. And again, we're well into it. The last few days, we have closed all restaurants, bars, recreation facilities, schools, everything except really the bare essentials. So, and it's changing by the hour. And I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that, Pam. Vika, I'd like to throw it over to you next.
Great. My name is Dr. Vika Bell Robinson, and I'm the Director of Residence Life at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. We are, everyone, I'm assuming is in the thick of it. We are as well. At Miami, we have decided that our classes will be online for the remainder of the semester. And so all of that was an announcement that happened last Tuesday. I don't even know. All of the days are blending. I think what happened first was that we transitioned to online classes last Tuesday. And then last Friday, the decision was made that, and it was only supposed to be a few weeks, like until April 3rd was the initial plan. And then last Friday, that changed from April 3rd to the remainder of the spring semester, with move out being March 27th. And then yesterday, move out got moved up to March 21st. The state of Ohio, we've been taking point from the governor of the state of Ohio, Mike DeWine, and he has been slowly closing things or advising for the closure of things. And so when the bars and restaurants received closure on Sunday, we talked, yesterday is when the decision was made to move out, move out to this Saturday at by like 5 p.m. And just as a note, Miami does have a J term, and so our term started at the end of January, and we were scheduled to go through sort of mid-May in our spring term. And so we haven't actually hit spring break at Miami yet. Our spring break was scheduled for next week. So that's where we're at. We are to-go options only in our dining halls. Less of them are open now. We do have students actively still in all of our residence halls, but a huge effort to push out as many, politely, escort students off campus as quickly as possible. And we seem to be very productive in that. We normally house around 8,500 students. And so we're down to maybe 2,000 or so still on campus, with more and more moving out as we speak.
Thank you, Vico. And Steve.
Thank you, Spencer. I'm Steve Harrison. I am Vice President for Auxiliary Enterprises here at Coastal Carolina University in otherwise lovely Conway, Myrtle Beach area. Housing and dining, as well as transportation, and interestingly, the entire custodial operation on campus are part of my portfolio. And so we're having some really interesting conversations about essential staff and whatnot in terms of cleaning and all those things that I'm sure other folks are having around the country. Things that are currently pressing on our campus are some of the things that Pam and Vic has shared. I would add that based on the actions of many of our campuses around the country, we've got a change.org petition about refunding housing, dining, and parking fees here at Coastal happening. So that's gotten a lot of attention, as you might imagine. So helping not only for our staff, but for our residents and their families to understand what our current priorities are in terms of caring for the health and safety of folks and managing the financial impact on individuals and the institution in the days to come. We are talking on our campus and working already to care for some ill students. We're caring for and housing some students who are waiting to be picked up one way or another or leave on their own. And then we are home, as many places are, for other students in our community. And so we're making provisions to be able to continue to house them regardless of what our academic continuity plan indicates, which will very likely, we're in our second week of spring break. We extended spring break by a week here at Coastal Carolina University and anticipate online delivery of our academic plan for the rest of the term, although I'm not certain that announcement has been made. And so no matter what that plan looks like, we're ready to remain home for as many of our residents as possible. So it is a lot of data collection and data coordination and trying to respond as politely as we can when we get some of the more individually centric questions, I would say.
Thanks for sharing, Steve. So you've heard some perspectives from a number of our facilitators today, and really we've got topics that we've put together so far, but we're looking for what you're looking to hear about today. So some notes for our roundtable. We want this to be conversation-based. We do not want this to be a traditional webinar. So, and also you have the opportunity to connect and be a part of the webinar in more than a viewer-listener context, and I'll explain that more in just a moment. We're able to take questions and comments from the audience if you use your Q&A button on your Zoom menu. So as many of you may be very experienced with Zoom and some of you may be new to it, you should see a bar of lovely webcams from our co-facilitators today, and you are able to move that bar wherever you'd like to on the screen. So you were able to view the PowerPoint slides well. At the same time, you should have a menu that includes Q&A, and you're able to submit your questions and comments there. What I would ask for you, if you are submitting a question or comment, if you could just jot down your name, your position, institution, as you submit that question, that'll help us connect with you throughout this session. myself and my colleague Lori from ACUI are going to be serving as facilitators in the background. So as we're going through discussions, we'll be going through questions that are coming in and interacting with those people submitting questions or comments. The opportunity that you have is we may ask you to ask your question live in the webinar via mic or via video and mic, depending on your setup that you have at your home institution or home office, wherever that may be today. So be mindful. We'd love to have you join in, and if you are called upon, we'll make you live in the webinar so you can ask that question in real time. So that being said, I can already see quite a few questions coming in the question and answer tab. That is excellent. I'm going to, this will be our first experiment. I've got a Matt Nelson I'm going to reach out to and connect with. Matt Nelson has submitted a question. Let me have him join our session and ask that question once he unmutes himself. So Matt's joining us. Matt, if you could unmute your mic and ask your question.
You bet. Can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt Nelson from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. There's a couple of us in the room, and we were just sitting around brainstorming what happens next. And so we're talking specifically about the essential personnel idea and what that means for our live-in staff, both professional and student staff. And as the university begins changing what is open and our kind of normal operations, what does that look like for live-in staff, for their health and safety, but also for services to our students?
Sure, I can try to answer that question. For what we're doing at Miami right now is we've actually just yesterday it was communicated to us that we are supposed to be remote working from home if we're not essential staff. Essential staff in the Division of Student Life include our student health services workers, our student counseling counselors, as well as live-in resident directors. And so as essential staff, they're expected to report and work like normal. From the first announcement last Tuesday when we went to online courses, we released the resident assistant staff. They have no responsibility to be here. Certainly if they're here, there's an expectation that they're continuing to fulfill their resident assistant responsibilities, but they were never considered sort of part of our overall pandemic plan. Years ago, we were writing our pandemic plan, and at the time, I remember people saying like, okay, so what role will the RAs play? And I was like, in no pandemic plan should we ever expect our student workers, our resident assistants to continue to be here when everything else is happening around the world. So they are not included as a part of our pandemic plan. We are happy that they're here and certainly utilizing them while they are here, but they have been since last Tuesday free to make an individual family decision to go home or to stay here in the same way that all of our other students have been able to do that. But our staff is essential. And so our live-in resident director staff is essential staff, as well as our graduate assistants who hold assistantships in the Office of Residence Life. We don't know what that'll look like once the halls dump, but what I anticipate is that we will transition our work to be more virtual and figuring out how do we continue to support students in their experience, even though they're not in person with us. By no means does our obligation as our responsibilities as residence life professionals and because students aren't living with us. We're all in the persistence and retention game, and our work will shift to that.
Thanks for sharing, Vika. And Matt, thank you for providing a question. All right. A topic that I'm seeing a lot of questions come in, and I'm going to ask it more generally for co-facilitators to answer, as at least provide insight or thoughts on what they're doing on their campuses, really comes down to student pay. It looks like we've got numerous campuses that the RA student staff member positions are ending early, and there's a lot of questions of if the compensation will be held throughout the semester as the semester continues at schools academically but not in person. What's happening with student staff pay?
Well, I'll start. I think it's What I would say to everybody is I think we're all trying to figure this out, and at any point in time, what we think or intend on doing could change. So at this point in time, I mean, much like Vika's team, our RA team, which is the student staff team, are not considered essential. At this point in time, we're not closing residence halls, although we may consolidate, likely will consolidate. And there will be some individuals who will opt to stay with us and will continue to use them in that role. For resident advisors who choose to leave, at this point in time, we would have them resign their positions. And the compensation for our RAs is all in-kind remuneration. And so it's room and board. And so if they do not remain on campus and obviously do not function as an RA, then that remuneration would go away. But obviously, if they're not here, they don't need that remuneration. Of equal and concern to us are thousands of hourly paid student workers that we use in residence life and particularly dining services. Because we have scaled back dining services so significantly and we have other full-time staff that we need to assign, all of our student staff have been relieved of duty. And we know that there are many students who rely on that part-time job. And so we do have emergency aid on our campus and some other options, but I think that we're going to see some students who have some individually have some significant impacts on losing that campus job, which is something that we're going, we'll have to think about as this goes on and on throughout the spring semester.
This has been a huge topic at Miami. I've spent probably a good 30% of my time responding to questions related to compensation of RAs from RAs, in addition to all of the other stuff that we've been managing on our campus. So at Miami, we are not a room and board system. We're not set up that way. Our students receive 10 equal payments of a stipend amount. That's sort of room rate. We have a cohort model. It gets super complicated, but basically their room rate plus a board supplement that doesn't quite cover board, but could, and then what we call an RA leadership, like an RA stipend and an allowance. So it's about $2,000 plus whatever their room rate is. And that's divided over the months that they work, over the 10 months, or obviously it's adjusted if an RA starts not at the beginning of the year. So when RA started going home, my chief concern was that they felt like they could go home, that they didn't need to stay. And so what we talked about was some sort of adjusted compensation. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like at Miami. That was a week ago when it was just going to be a few weeks. Now that we've rolled into the rest of the semester, I think we're still having some conversations about that. But the idea is that we're compensating sort of all of the RAs for the work that they did for the year appropriately. Those RAs that stayed when they could have left, a little bit of a different recognition. And then if we have RAs that continue as we enter into this new phase, they would get the continuation of their pay. But those conversations are still we're still very early in discussion at Miami on what those look like. But it's a super hot topic for our students. And then for our student workers in general, and I know this is a housing and residence life conversation, but for student workers in general at Miami, we've basically suspended student employment completely at Miami University, sans a few students that might be used in our dining halls. But everything, the libraries, reducing staff, and the rec centers reducing staff, and there's just a lot of reduction of student staff across the board. And so we know that that's going to be an experience that our students are having to navigate and negotiate. But that's just kind of where we're at as a school and in our state. I don't know if there are other folks that have a different experience in the state of Ohio, but that's what we're seeing here in Oxford.
Yeah, Spencer, I'll add separately, in terms of our student employees on campus, those folks are standing down based on the service, the office where they work, and the service being provided or not. So on our campus, dining services is provided by a third-party contractor, and if that contractor needs them and they can work safely and they're in the area, those students can continue to work. But in other circumstances, the library, for instance, is moving quickly to an all-online delivery, and so the students who aren't necessary for that online delivery won't have hours to work. And university housing, at least as of this morning, we still maintain some students who are answering our main line, for instance, if they were living on campus or in the area and could work. In terms of RAs, our model is like what Pam described, in that they receive room and board to serve as student leaders, as RAs on our campus. We have, in some ways, the benefit of having to do a little hurricane dance every year for the last 5 years. And so we know what it is to close and to determine what happens with RAs who, as we talk about it, choose not to come with us when we evacuate. So we have closed our residence halls and evacuated several times, and taken with us only those students who can't evacuate on their own. And when we do so, we put it to the RA, because we see them primarily as students, that they need to make a decision about their evacuation based on their own family's wishes and health and safety. And so the same thing is true here, that if there are RAs who have stuck around and are willing to be useful in one way or another, or RAs who can't leave for one reason or another, for instance, a family health concern, we'll give them that opportunity. And when we get to a place where we're talking about refund in total and or refund more generally, we'll, I'm sure, have conversation with financial aid about how we adjust the appropriate charges for room and board such that cost of attendance and the financial aid package adjusts similarly. And to hop back just a moment to professional live-in staff, which we started with, one of the things that's true about our professional live-in staff that I think, I'm not sure anyone can describe them as non-essential, but there are lots of things they can do as kind of essential from home. And so we're working with community coordinators is how we talk about those staff here at Coastal and what they can do. And among the things we're talking with them about is their personal circumstances. Some of them have families living with them on campus, so they have extreme concerns about exposing themselves to contact with students who may be ill or may have traveled, et cetera. And so we're working with them on a case-by-case basis. And we have also worked very, very hard to stand up contractors such that we are not going to be asking our staff, unless they volunteer, and we can promise them training and personal protective equipment, asking our staff to be part of cleaning, trash removal, or food delivery to those students who will remain on campus unless they feel comfortable. So we're working hard on those things, and those things will be rolled out. But as we do with our students, all of our staff and all of our live-in staff in particular need to be handled with care and understand that their life is broad, and even the life within the residence halls with their families is more than I think I was familiar with as a live-in staff member to start off with in my career.
Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Another common theme I'm seeing in questions coming in, and I'd love to call on someone, but I know we have a variety of these similarly phrased questions, is when we look at professional staff members, and obviously many of our campuses are having move-outs occurring in the next week or two, are there plans in place if a live-on staff member unfortunately contracts COVID-19?
We are obviously being advised by our public health department, as well as a campus committee that is specific to this issue. And so we have a protocol in place for students or staff or anyone that we would follow in that regard. The ability to self-isolate is critical to this process. So if, for example, a staff member was instructed to self-isolate, they certainly could do that within their own living space. And, I think we're all familiar with the fact that the quality of the self-isolating is very key. If that individual, if we need, if that person had family and other things, and we would go through the same process we do with students, are there other locations where they could be in a self-isolation situation, a friend or family friendly situation. But there would be no reason necessarily to remove the person from their own residence, but certainly to practice the self-isolation habits that would exist for any of us.
We're getting similar guidance to what Pam described from our public health folks, and I think both for professional staff, but our students as well. The question about whether or not they can remain in their residence if they're symptomatic has almost everything to do with how severe the symptoms are. And so we'll work with them, with our public health folks, and EMS willing to transport, depending on the circumstance, to get them to a medical facility if necessary. But like in so many of these situations, it's going to be very one-on-one conversation and their level of comfort and understanding of the issue they're facing.
Thanks for sharing. All right, another question. This one is from Steph Kaneen from Colorado State University. How are you all supporting and working around graduate students and their roles within departments during this time with assistantships, etc., especially if you have grads who are live-in and typically be on call?
So our guidance for how graduate students are compensated and what happens to their assistantship comes from our graduate school. And at this point, all Miami University graduate students are still expected to work. Those that are not live-in are expected to work remotely, but obviously the live-in grads are essential they're essential personnel, and so they're expected to be here and report as essential personnel. Compensation is also something that's been handled by the graduate school. You know, in the earlier days of this, there was lots of concern about, will I be compensated and what does that look like? But since their assistantships are still intact, there's really no question about whether or not they'll continue to be compensated. My staff was a little bit worried about having to move. Like, oh, if something happens, are we going to have to be moved out of our apartments? And I've received confirmation from our Dean of Students that at this point we have no intention of moving anyone. So really what's changing is what's happening in the facility around them, but and some of their day-to-day, obviously, with students not being here. But in terms of their assistantships and their compensation, those things are intact at Miami.
Thanks, Becca. We also received quite a few questions regarding students that have either there's a move-in date that's been established on the campus currently or has not been. So we actually have a function on Zoom. If you wiggle your mouse, you move your screen, next to the Q&A tab, there's actually a raised hands tab. And what I would like our attendees to do, that if you have a planned date when move out needs to occur that's been moved up, if you could just raise your hand. And that'll really show us, give us an idea of percentage of our attendees that are seeing that as a situation on their campus. So again, we're looking for people to hit the raise hand button if your campus has accelerated move out and has a move out date planned currently.
Spencer, while we're getting
Sure.
Hands raised, taking a straw poll, so to speak, one of the things I would clarify, because I imagine there are other institutions out there like ours, we don't have a move out date per se. What we've done is indicated a date and time, happens to be tomorrow noon, whereby we are moving to a limited authorized access only period in our residence halls. And so if you have not requested and been approved to remain here after that moment, de facto you must move out. But we've tried to be careful with our language to not suggest that we're closing entirely, and to not give the impression by saying it's move out time that we're going to be chasing folks away, but that we want to provide them an opportunity to give us information and for us to react to that information. So I might kind of be in the middle in terms of how I might raise my hand based on your straw poll. So
Sure.
I imagine it's nuanced, and for us, there is kind of an announced date and time, but again, it's not strictly move out. It's not strictly we're closing the halls. It's tell us what you need, because after this point, we're going to be asking a whole lot more question in concert with our Department of Public Safety, in concert with any number of other folks who are in the area and on our campus who need to be clear about who's around.
Thank you. And I would say in our unofficial hand-raised straw poll, about 25% of our attendees would say that they have an established move-out date that's been moved up. So, I mean, it sounds like there's many campuses in similar situations as to what you're describing.
Spencer, I would add, and I think this is likely true for, well, I know this is true for everyone, that, we're being very thoughtful about our students' needs. And not only do we, like many, have, thousands of international students, but we also have domestic students who don't have a place to return to, choose not to because there's someone at home at risk, or there's other circumstances that prevent them. And so I think that the idea of continuing operations and what will that look like for your program is something to consider. Vika talked about still providing students an experience and the services that they need. And we obviously have to change that up. I mean, we can't do business like we always have. But this is a point in time when I think everybody, will have to revisit the definition of engagement, the definition of student support, and the definition of, what does it mean to provide housing for students who have these unique situations. This will bring out the best in us as a profession.
Another question that just had come in is, what are some justified reasons for allowing students to stay in residence halls outside of I mean, I know we've talked about it, if they have nowhere else to go or if they are unable to make travel accommodations. What are some other potential justified reasons that are being seen out there?
So we have a weird, unique circumstances happening at Miami because things have changed so quickly. Because at first it was just going to be a few weeks, and then it was like, okay, please go. We have way more students that have belongings still in their room, and so it's not that they're still here, but that their rooms aren't completely vacant. That's a reason. If we, our goal, because we don't want students to get trapped here, is to have them themselves leave as quickly as possible. Miami, we're about 40% out of state, and so some of our students are flying to California, and they're just not going to be able to leave. Like they just can't take their stuff, and so not that they're permission to stay, but certainly permission to leave belongings in a way that we've never done before. Some other things, obviously, international students have reasons to stay. Whether they can't travel because wherever they want to go, there's a travel ban, or because they just have concerns about being able to get back when all of this is over. We're granting those typically. Students with, I was actually just doing this before this call, but students that have belongings in their room, students who have elderly guardians that might be at risk, students that are just from bad home situations, students that don't have online access wherever they're from. And so maybe I'm in an area of the country or in the area of the state where Wi-Fi is shaky and I need to be able to get online and do my classes. So those are some of the reasons why students are being permitted to stay. And we understand this is a quick change for students, and so certainly we're reviewing all of those requests, but we believe what students say too. So if somebody says, like, I'm coming from a really bad place and I can't do it, I can't go back there, we're like, we believe you. And so those are some of the reasons why students might not go. A vast majority of our students at Miami can go, do have places to go, are making other arrangements, but there are some students where this is the best place for them to be.
Vika, I just want to just to say how much I appreciate your comment, because I think that, again, this is a time where we have to figure out what our guiding principles are around this. And then we have to move forward in making decisions based on those guiding principles. And I think given that we are here to support our students' academic success, their personal success, that needs to continue to be, our fundamental philosophy about this process. This dealing with this issue, I can't imagine for anybody, is a matter of coming up with a new set of policies that apply across the board. This is really about being quite creative. But if you need some if you need a compass, so to speak, in terms of the decisions you're making, it may be worth just taking whatever valuable time you have, grabbing some time with your team members and saying, what will our philosophical foundation be in moving forward in working with our students? And, as you mentioned, one for you is we are going to believe what a student tells us. And not, there's going to be, we're going to be treating students differently, and it might not be equal, but it certainly may be equitable.
I want to celebrate both of those thoughts and add to that in terms of going back to our critical intent, going back to our missions. I mean, at Coastal Carolina University, we're constantly talking about creating a foundation of care for resident safety and success. And so it's easy to answer that question most of the time. And so one follow-on question might be, how do you operationalize that? And so very similar to what Vika and Pam have described in terms of the way we're collecting information from students, we were able to work with our Department of Emergency Management on campus through public safety and stand up using their resources, a call center. And when we collect information via a form from a student who says, this is my circumstance, whatever those enumerated reasons may be, if it's not clear to us, because our intent is to believe the student and care for the student, if it's not clear, we have a very clear process now for calling them with a secondary set of questions and walking through with them. We want to meet you where we are. We want to love on you. We want to care for you. Let's talk about it. And then from that point, jump back to the kind of harsh reality of, can we actually care based on this circumstance? And very often, I think what we'll find is that it happens is when a student says, well, I picked that one, but we found this again in hurricane circumstances here at Coastal. They said that, well, it's this. It's like, okay, well, I hear you. And what you're saying to me sounds like you actually do have an option. Oh yeah, I probably do. Okay, well then please make your way off campus for your safety and everybody else's. Or the opposite of that may be, what you've described is actually much more dramatic than I was understanding. And so for that reason, here's the guidance we can provide you. And when would you like us to start delivering food to you? So I love those thoughts. And I think it's probably what is guiding all of us in terms of being housing and student affairs professionals, and return to your critical intent. And I will just add from my perspective on campus, I have the privilege, I suppose, of serving in the executive management group of our emergency management team. So I'm in with the president and our CFO and others, and that team is really working hard to be student affairs professionals and understand this. But often in the conversations that we're a part of, it's for us to speak up and say, let's talk about the reality of these students' lives. Let's talk about the reality of the lives of the staff we're asking to execute these processes and these new policies, as Pam described very creatively. I think it falls to us. Often the housing professional are the folks who get to be at weird tables with unique experience and say what is true and connect the people who make the big decisions on our campuses with what our actual students and staff experience is. And we have that, what I would suggest is a moral obligation to do that and do it clearly and professionally.
Thank you all for outstanding comments and feedback there. We have our next question coming to us from the audience. So I have Keith James joining us. He's the Director of Student Life at Dickinson State University in Dickinson, North Dakota. So Keith, I'll allow you to unmute and ask your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you all doing this forum this afternoon. My question is, for those of you that have had to implement your emergency management plan for this type of situation, specifically around pandemic and infectious disease, has your plan worked as expected? Are there areas that when you go back and look after this is all over that you're already seeing that you may need to tweak some things? And are there things that weren't in your plan that you have had to add into your plan at this point? So thank you.
So I had the opportunity to be on a planning group years ago for our pandemic process. And I remember us thinking that we would dump a hall. So if we need to isolate students, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to dump a building and relocate students, and then we'll put other students in there. And that seemed like a really good idea like 4 years ago. And then last week I was in another meeting and we were talking about our plan and how many beds we could produce and if we had to self-isolate and what sort of our cap And we realized that housing students in one of those halls was it was just never going to work. Especially if you consider now that you're in it and students have left, and so there was belongings in rooms, and you have to flip and clean those spaces and then relocate them. You've got to dump the entire building because you can't just dump part of it if you need to self-isolate, because if people figure out that they're living someplace where people are self-isolated, and then what happens if somebody else gets sick? It was just never going to be a good idea. And we didn't walk down that road, but to answer your question, it was something that we thought might be a good idea. And then when we were in the reality of it, we just realized it was not ever gonna work. And I'm sure that we're learning other things right now. We set up a call center, and even so what happened at Miami is in January, we had a suspected case. And so we got a little bit of a trial run on what this might look like in terms of a call center and responding and moving students and getting them resources. And then this happened last week, where we didn't have any suspected things. We had some students that were at conferences that they could have come in contact with, but it was because of everything else that's happening. What happened in Ohio, and I don't know if this is true for a lot of other schools in the state, but Ohio State made the decision first. And when Ohio State made the decision to go online, everybody else is like, wait, what? And so then the rest of us are like, okay, well, since they have 64,000 students and we have 17,000 and they're making this decision, then maybe we should all make this decision. But those are some of the things we've learned. The whole thing is a learning experience.
Yeah, I would say quite similarly. It is a little early for me to comment as to everything that is working versus what's not working. I think there's some things yet to come. I think just to that point, what I would say is drill. I know that we tend to put these things aside. Like Vika, we had actually 4 suspected cases in January. At the time, they all turned out negative, but it instantly put us in this this is real mode. And even then, we activated our plan and did everything in those instances that we that the plan said, and so it was good practice. The challenge with this right now is things are changing so quickly that the plan is working, but we're really relying on, again, a lot of those guiding principles. But getting your staff to practice how to communicate, and how, you don't have to practice solving every problem. You have to practice this problem-solving behavior, right? So, that's what I would say at this point.
Yeah, I would add or reframe perhaps the idea of working the plan as the plan working, to think about it from a perspective of working your process. So whatever our plan, I think our pandemic plan was for swine flu or SARS or something. And so these are different illnesses, and every single one of these will be different. And so almost the moment this became real in our area, some of those things don't apply or apply differently. And so what we do have, though, is a process that can be put in place, to Pam's point about practicing, about drilling, about knowing where the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, is on campus for those who are staffed there, other things, working that process works. And the process itself has as a component of it documenting questions, concerns, whatever those things may be that have to be part of your after action review, such that the plan can be updated for a future instance. But at the moment, those are things where, the old lovely working with your RA staff brainstorming process, there's a parking lot, 3M sticky on the wall effectively, where we're putting some of those issues for later, and we'll have to come back to those when we can.
Just a final comment on this, and it's quite practical, so perhaps everyone has thought about it, but document everything. If you haven't started, start immediately. Document everything. Figure out a process for doing that. I realize it can be time consuming, but in the end, whatever it is you need to do in terms of coming out of this process, that documentation will prove to be very beneficial.
Thank you all. And as you are submitting questions, you can see other people's questions, so feel free to, if there's other people you want to reach out to as you're on this conversational webinar and you see contacts and colleagues in the field that are asking questions, feel free to reach out to them during or after this webinar and connect with them. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to build community in this field, and if that can be a silver lining that comes through this crisis that we're seeing, that is a great thing to have happen. Our next person that we're going to be having a question from the audience from is Owen Garrett. So Owen, you're going to be coming up in just a moment. If you could unmute yourself and share your question with the group.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and expertise during the webinar this afternoon. My big question right now, amongst the many that have been asked, is about mail. We have a number of individuals who have mail and packages coming, prescription medications, things coming from overseas. And in the middle of this, we have set up a move-out process, and we'll have a lot of packages we need to figure out how to navigate. And I think simply just saying return to sender is not going to serve our purposes. Have any of you figured out a process by which you are managing mail packages, other important notifications, and so how is that navigated at your institutions?
So at Miami, we're using our end of the year process. And that's, I guess that's part of the benefit of actually making the decision that we're going to be not having a large residential population on campus, but we're using our end of the year process. So mail delivery will end into the residence halls on the 20th of this week. And then things will get sent back home unless a student is here on campus. And then they can go to we have a centralized mail operations. And so they'll go there and pick up their mail like they would if they were a summer resident or here during some other break. But
Okay.
that's how we're managing it.
Okay.
Although what I would offer is that mail services is part of my responsibility. It exists outside of the housing department in particular. And so we have two things happening. One is that the majority of our staff in mail services outside of students are all in CDC high-risk groups. Mm-hmm. And so we're concerned about them being on campus. And additionally, we are going to work with those who have indicated to us there's something en route or something there that they might need to talk to them about. Is there another way you can get access to that? So may it be prescription medicines or other things. And we'll kind of have to manage that on a case-by-case basis. But we are talking through in the period between this moment and when we go to full kind of limited access to residence halls, as I talked about before. Can we open mail services for a period so students can go and get their things there? And so we're talking through that, but unfortunately I don't have a great set of answers and protocols in place for you yet.
I understand.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that question, Owen. Another topic that we've been seeing a lot of questions over and is really the crux of what we do is that student support. And what are campuses doing to support students who are on campus, and what are campuses doing to support students who used to be on campus?
I guess I would comment and say I think that this is probably the most uncharted piece of this, if there can be. I mean, it's all uncharted, but this idea of how our students will continue to be students and student scholars, but how do we make sure that they continue to feel connected and find community? We haven't figured this out by any means. We are talking about how we extend all of student services in regard to our campus to students, and I think it will. We will both be frustrated by that, but also I think the creativity will lead us to find some avenues that, believe it or not, when this whole thing is over, or at least has been minimized, we may find some new ways of doing business that actually benefit us in the long term. But as far as our residential communities at this point, we'll continue to serve the students who stay, and probably try to use online community development as much as possible. More specifics, we just haven't figured it out yet.
We're in the thick of what feels like move out right now, and so figuring out what that support for students who used to be residential students or who would otherwise be residential students is still something that we're nuancing here at Miami. But I will say that part of what my staff regularly does is well checks on students. So if there's a student of concern issue that pops up for a student, the resident director or the graduate assistant working with that community is likely being asked to go and follow up with that student if they're here in person. We're continuing that process even if the student is no longer here. So if they used to be a residential student, they're still ours, and we're still going to follow up with them. And that might be, instead of knocking on their door, that might be giving them a call. We had a few of those things happen even just today where students have already left. And so their RD is calling them and saying, hey, there was this concern issued for you, and I just want to connect and make sure you're still connected to resources. And that's, I think, pretty comforting to students because we aim to have a relationship with our students. And so now some of that work that we did in person is really still very beneficial because now there's a relationship, not cold calling you and saying, hey, I heard this thing, but like, no, you know me, we shared a community together. Let me still reach out and demonstrate care for you and your experience. And then I saw a question that I think ties into this related to living learning communities. And if you have living learning communities, what does that look like? And again, I think we're still sort of thinking about those things, but there's a lot of virtual things that you can do related to living learning communities and enhancing that experience. A lot of things around group work can still happen, whether it's happening via Google or WebEx or Zoom. And so I think it's still the responsibility of the hall director or the learning community manager, whoever's managing that, to figure out how to make those things work. And in some cases, we may find that it's more effective this way because now students are looking for ways to connect with each other in a way that was super convenient and easy for them to do previously. But I think once we're not sort of in the fire of it all, we'll be able to think more creatively about what we can do to support students who would otherwise be residential, as well as the students who are still here. We had a comment yesterday from a student who was just glad the RD didn't leave too. There's so many people leaving right now. RAs are leaving, their residential friends are leaving. And so somebody was like, just glad to see that their head of hall was still there because they were worried they'd be all alone. So some of what we're doing right now is just still being there. And that's why they're essential staff, because our presence matters.
One thing I would add to that as well is, and this gets a little bit of kind of a pet peeve of mine, I suppose, but I think particularly well-resourced housing departments have a propensity to pretend we're a mini student affairs division. And go beyond our actual scope of responsibility and stand in place of the wonderful resources students will still have access to on your campus, even virtually. And so this is an opportunity to use the wonderful connections, not only that we've got with our students, but with other ally offices on your campus, to talk with them about how you can connect. I mean, biggest example of we still might be standing up, and working with small groups who are doing things within the LLP, and we could find a way to connect them to a counselor who might be on call, or whatever the circumstance may be, to do a check-in. I think we can draw in the other wonderful resources we have on campus who are working remotely or maybe in their offices still and desperately want to be of service and may not have as easy a connection as we do to some of our students, resident or otherwise. And so let's remember that one of our critical functions is to make connections with our students to other resources on campus, and we can still be doing that in this circumstance, no matter what the modality may be.
Thank you all. Wow, you are an outstanding panel today. I recognize that we have about 5 minutes left in our session today. I've got a couple rapid fire questions I will throw out, and then we will close. We've got another question from the audience. This is from Allison Senadino. So I'm making Allison live. So, oh, Allison. Oh. There Allison is. So, man, Allison live. Allison, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
Hi, folks. So similarly to the vein of how we support our students, how are we continuing to give support, especially in the mental health realm, to our staff members, understanding that for our live-ins and our live-out staff members and residents life, that this can be a scary time in seeing what's going on with their students and how their students are impacted by this, as well as this is that type of emergency that doesn't end when you go home. It's that constant emergency that's kind of pervasive and that could affect their students, their own families, themselves. What kind of mental health support are you all trying to give to those staff members because of how large this situation is?
Allison, that's a great question. Let me speak first to our experience with hurricanes here at Coastal. So that is an incredibly stressful situation. We have had folks from the Midwest come to work for us here at Coastal, and somehow they're perfectly comfortable responding when a tornado might come. But this idea of a very slow, very huge storm approaching is terrifying. And so, we do the things one might expect, connecting them in the moment and afterwards, for the months afterwards, to employee assistance programs to remind them about the free sessions they have available to them through that kind of a program at Human Resources. In a more immediate way, we do the things that, and I hope we're doing the things that we would expect, where when someone on call calls us up the chain, so to speak, and is, okay, I got this thing I'm working on, taking a moment to de-escalate and speak in that kind of radio DJ voice, so, NPR voice of, how are you? Are you okay? Take a deep breath for me. I mean, things that could be in another moment patronizing, I think in that kind of an instance might actually help to say, we've got a minute here. Let's talk through what you're doing so that you're okay, and then therefore the student you're trying to care for will be even more okay. I think those are important things. But, our psychology and our biology is built so that we manage these things in a certain way in the moment, and then they seem to meter themselves out in the longer term. And I think you have to remain vigilant. I've been in rooms recently. Our last hurricane thing was in October, and in the recent past, I was in a room with many of our live-in staff who, among the many things they were talking to me about, we're still experiencing some significant stress and anxiety, and never having gotten past some of the fatigue that was true of having to evacuate along with our students. That I, having done it more times, felt like we were past. But they were not. And so I think that's a perceptive question, and one where it's going to be just like we're doing with residents, communicating with each individually and knowing both kind of the official ways in which the university or your employer provides resources, but also the less official ones about how can I care for you. You might know, Allison, amongst your staff that 2 or 3 folks are close, or a particular staff member is very close to folks at home. And even if they can't be with those folks, you might ask them, have you checked in with Pam or Vika today? Because I noticed that they're your support system. Like, how are they? Are you all talking? Have you talked with your brother or your sister who may be at home? And so I would offer use what you know about these folks, because I think your gut to care for them is probably the best possible thing to provide useful care.
I think the other thing, and I think those were all great from Stephen, I think the other thing is to recognize that this is hard. And it is okay that it is hard, because it is hard for all of us. And that's not to relieve leaders from their responsibility of supporting the folks that are working with them, but to just sort of own that it's hard. My staff last week, we were talking a little bit, and I said, this is really sad for me. It's sad to see that our students who thought they had a few more months don't have that time. And I've definitely had my own emotional reactions to it, and I think talking a little bit about your own reactions is helpful in normalizing the fact that it's okay if you're having reactions. And I can't agree more with the employee assistance program. I think we probably don't use that resource as much as we should normally, but certainly we have resources at our universities to support staff mental health issues and concerns. I also think that it's important for people to recognize that they're responsible for recognizing what kind of support they need. Pam and Stephen and I and others are managing a lot of different things right now, and managing someone's mental health on our team, while we might want to be able to do that and do that well, there's a lot of other things we're managing. And I guess my big concern, or what I hope people on this call are thinking about, is yes, I think good leaders can manage those things, but also their inability to do it when in the course of everything else that's happening does not mean that there's no care, that there's no leadership, that there's no support. It just means that they're also human and they're also managing lots of different things. I have 3 kids. They're all home right now. Because they don't have school for 3 weeks. I hope it's just 3 weeks, but who knows how long. And so we're all managing a lot of different things. And sometimes we need folks to, certainly as adults, think about what kind of resources they need and how they can manage their own mental health as well. And to communicate those needs, right? And then I think as leaders, we have the responsibility to hear those needs and hear those communications and see what we can do to support that. But also we have individual responsibilities to try to manage our own emotions as best as we can in this very tumultuous situation.
First of all, thank you for chiming in on that and sharing those comments. I want to be very mindful of time, as we have attendees that have slotted this hour to spend with us, and I know that they need to be moving on. So I'm going to wrap up our virtual roundtable today.
Spencer, can I ask just real quickly? I know
Certainly.
that there's lots of questions or lots of wonderings about refunds. I know that's a big deal. I saw that question come up. We haven't addressed that at all. And so if we could before, and I get that like people have this hour and it was already hard to squeeze in, but I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't talk about refunds and what people are doing around that, and if they're doing credits or whatnot. I know that's probably an important question out there for a lot of schools. What I can tell you at Miami is that we're working on we're more closed than maybe some other institutions. And so we're working on a partial refund for our students related to room and board. We're obviously still holding classes, and so there is at this point in time, no discussion of any sort of tuition refund, but certainly with the halls going, that's what we're doing. I don't know if the other 2 schools can chime in, but I know that that's an important question for folks on the call.
Sure, and I can chime in as an OSU employee officially, that Ohio State is also prorating their housing and dining refunds to students, and that came out a couple days ago, and that was a big deal for students to get that back at Ohio State.
Yeah, just real quickly, the same for us. Obviously, if a student is not staying for spring quarter, there's nothing for them to purchase and pay for. And we're still working out some of the details about proration of winter quarter or other kinds of things that might occur. And I mean, it's been made pretty clear, and we obviously are on board with this, that as an institution, we need to be as flexible and reasonable as possible for what students are being asked to pay for.
Yeah, I would echo that. We're details to be worked out. I'm pleased that our administration is talking to us about what we recommend and what is plausible. I think as an institution, as so many are, that is fairly dependent, not just in housing and dining, but beyond in terms of the revenues that we bring in. There's some really hard questions to answer about what we want to do or wish we could do relative to the financial health of the institution in the short and the long term. Understanding that those decisions also will have profound impact on individual students whose families and they themselves are going to have prolonged impacts financially that we can't necessarily anticipate. So we're working through those questions diligently. And again, I think if it's not a conversation on your campus yet, at least that you're involved in, it's a conversation somewhere. And so it's one that I think as a housing professional, you can start working really hard to build a model, see what the costs look like, think about things like, there might be summer projects that are being planned that are luxuries, and you can suggest maybe that summer project doesn't happen so that there's more monies available to do what we might think is appropriate in terms of credits or refunds or rebates. Just because some may not be thinking this way, there are institutions that are talking about refund, which I would understand to be a payback right this minute or in the current term of monies already paid. There's also talk about a rebate, which might be some kind of percentage-based reduction of the charge in the current term. And then I think Vic even mentioned the idea of credits, which I understand the way we're talking about it on our campus is taking an amount of money paid and crediting that forward to a future term where one might have housing, dining, or tuition costs. And so each of those has different implications for the financial statement of the institution and our cash flows and the impact on a student and their bank account. And all of those are things that you should take into consideration when you're considering or recommending to your university's administration what you might do.
Thank you all. And Vika, thank you for bringing it up. You're absolutely correct. That is a very important topic. A few notes prior to us departing our virtual roundtable for today. We do have an ACUI resource page devoted to COVID-19 resources for campuses, so please check that out on our website. Also on that page are the results of last week's straw poll that was done on Thursday and Friday. So take a look at the results there. You can also get some snapshots and graphics of that via our social media accounts. We do have 3 more virtual roundtables occurring this week. We have a virtual roundtable for live-in staff tomorrow, senior housing officers on Thursday, and then we have another open forum for all on Friday. We will have a variety of panelists and co-facilitators for all of those. So thanks in advance those of you who are helping out. Steve, Pam, Vika, you've all been outstanding this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your insights, and your passion for helping students.
Thank you, Spencer. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. And that is a wrap. We will be recording this and posting this on our social media accounts and YouTube. More to come. Keep making campus home.